And we will look at narratives and some strategies that you guys can use with your children at home to help develop their literacy and language skills. So I also forgot to mention, if you have questions as we go, feel free to put them in the chat so that we can address those questions. I might see them, I might not, just because it's hard to manage everything in the chat, but we'll get to them for sure. We'll
I'm looking at them, Chelsea. I'll give you a cue if
perfect.
There's anything, okay?
Awesome, sounds good. So for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between oral and written language and different purposes for reading, some shared reading strategies, and some comprehension instruction strategies. I really like this art piece. It talks about, or it's meant to show the effect that a book can have. So in terms of the relationship between oral and written language, I'm just gonna give a little bit of background information just to make sure we're all on the same page. Sometimes the words receptive language and expressive language are kind of jargony. So receptive language really describes the ability to understand language. It's the words and sentences that people, or like the ability to understand the words and sentences that people use. Whereas expressive language is the ability to then use vocabulary and grammar effectively to communicate with other people. Some children have trouble with both receptive language and expressive language, but some children have just more difficulty with one. It's just, they go hand in hand sometimes though. And then relating language to the image here, that understanding and use of language has a really close and interconnected relationship with written language. So spoken language kind of provides the foundation for reading and writing. So children who have trouble understanding language often then, of course, have challenges understanding what they're reading. They don't have the foundational language skills that are required to understand what they're reading in text. This is especially often because books tend to have more complex vocabulary and sentence structure. They're not necessarily the type of language that kids hear day after day. So they might be novel and harder to understand in books as well. And books also require kids to kind of incorporate a lot of information and maybe read between the lines to understand the overall message. So children with language disorders are going to have a hard time with that. And the same goes for expressive language. Children who have trouble making grammatical sentences or using a variety of vocabulary words, they're not going to have the capacity to then get pen and paper and write grammatically or use complex vocabulary words, because again, they don't necessarily have that foundation built yet to have that capacity. So that oral language really, again, sets the foundation for reading and writing. But there is a reciprocal relationship, because reading and writing can also build a child's ability to develop their spoken language. When they're getting the opportunity to hear and use more complex sentence structure and vocabulary when they're reading and writing, they're also then increasing their capacity to understand and use those words in their spoken language. So written language and spoken language kind of have a reciprocal relationship. And not only that, but eventually there kind of is a shift from kids learning to read to reading to learn. So eventually kids are able to read a book about spiders and develop that language about spiders in their spoken language because they have the capacity to read it. So oral and written language, they really build on each other, and we need to have a good foundation of both to develop those skills successfully. So because of that relationship between spoken and written language as well, instruction in written language has been shown to also impact spoken language, and instruction in spoken language has also been shown to impact written language. They're really tied together. So with that relationship in mind, it's really important to find out kind of how to successfully implement some strategies to support both their oral and written language. So there are three big components of literacy intervention. The first one is phonological awareness and alphabet knowledge. I could kind of do a full hour presentation on phonological awareness and alphabet knowledge, but I'll kind of give a broad description of it. Phonological awareness it's kind of an understanding of how to use sounds in different ways and kind of the flexibility of sounds in language. So that can include the ability to rhyme, to recognize the individual sounds in words. Like cup isn't just a sound, it's composed of three sounds, k, p. And it also, phonological awareness also involves like the ability to blend sounds together to create a word, and taking that k, p, and recognizing, it's not just those three sounds, they go together to make cup. And there's more parts of phonological awareness, but really it's that understanding of how to use sounds in different ways and the flexibility to use sounds in different ways. And it's kind of a foundational skill that is really recommended that we start before letter knowledge. Like the ability to rhyme kind of sets the foundation for those further developing phonological awareness skills. And then alphabet knowledge is, of course, something that you all know. It's an understanding of how those sounds in language then correlate to individual letters, and even like the understanding that some letters might have many sounds. So these are often like the core things that people work on in literacy intervention, but there are a lot of parts involved as well, such as shared reading and comprehension instruction. So I'll go into more detail about shared book reading and shared reading, but in general, it's really about not only just reading the books, but having the opportunity to create interactions around those books and building language and communication skills with the book as only a part of the interaction. And then comprehension instruction is another thing I'll go into detail about, but it's about helping children get actual meaning from the text. It's a really complex skill. Reading comprehension is a complex skill because the kids are not only having to sound out all the individual sounds and words, but then they also, and like decoding the words and figuring out what the words are, but then they have to pull meaning from those words as well. So there are a lot of pieces involved, and comprehension instruction is kind of helping develop that meaning piece rather than the decoding piece, if that makes sense. So these components of literacy intervention, we need to kind of work on them all together because we can't work on just one of them. We need to work on all of them, really. So shared reading, like I mentioned, the focus is on maximizing the interaction page by page, really build on language and communication. And comprehension instruction is, again, pulling meaning from the text without, focusing on just that decoding piece. We want them to understand what they're reading. So, these kind of go together. And the components of literacy intervention directly impact oral and written language. So shared interactions and shared book reading activities help develop children's language and communication, because you're creating that opportunity for interaction and understanding and using language. Whereas comprehension instruction strategies help develop reading comprehension when they're reading text. So for shared interactive reading, we want to sort of read with the children, not to the children. There are definitely benefits to reading, of course, because there are so many words that children are exposed to in books, and so many opportunities to hear different sentences. But shared book reading is, it's important to have more than just the words on the page. It's the talk that's surrounding it and connecting it to your kids' lives that really gives it such a great amount of power. So to participate in that shared book reading, it's really important to provide some comments, give some questions, and just have conversations and follow your child's lead regarding the book, surrounding the book. It's less about, necessarily what's in the book, and more about the joint interaction and that you have together. So, you could, this book is about like going into a cave and fish and things, and, they're talking about how they're brave. Are you brave? And you can ask questions like, oh, they're going first. Would you send me first? Or would you take a deep breath and be brave and go first? Questions like that. Or, you can make comments about things that you see in the book. Really follow, just find things to comment on and connect it to their lives. Oh, we saw a cave when we went hiking that one time. And follow your child's interest. So if they point out a random little thing on the page, go with it and talk about it. And, find opportunities to create those interactions and make it an enjoyable experience for both of you. Shared book reading is about creating that language opportunity, but another really important part of shared book reading is creating a positive orientation towards books and literacy with your kids. We want them to love books, and we want them to recognize the power that books can have. So that shared book reading is really powerful. You can do this with different types of books. I believe that the type of book matters less than the way you use it. You can do these shared book reading activities with picture books. You can do them with pages that have one word on the book. Normally a book that you just read, like apple, orange, zebra, things like that, like they're not going to be entertaining for a child necessarily, but it's the conversations you can have around them and commenting on the pictures that creates that positive feeling toward literacy and the opportunity for language growth. Books that interact are really nice because there's lots of different types of learning opportunities in those, in a book that you can feel all the different parts, like the fuzzy ducks or the rough alligators, those types of things. It gives you some really good opportunities to have that like extra textual talk where you talk about things outside of just what's written on the page. You can talk about how soft something is. You can relate it to something that, your blanket's really soft too, or things like that. Books that repeat give a nice opportunity to kind of maybe guess what's going to happen next because they're really predictable. So like in the book, Brown Bear, Brown Bear, it's the same pattern throughout the book. where like brown bear, what do you see? I see a whatever looking at me. And on the next page, it just goes with the same pattern. And, you can create some opportunities to have, like, I wonder what's going to be next. Or you can talk about a time you've seen those things as well. But it just gives your child an opportunity to kind of engage in that book. And books that play with language are also really nice, especially, for children who are still developing those phonological awareness skills. Books like The Cat in the Hat are nice because there's that rhyming component. And The Cat in the Hat also has lots of words, there's plays on words and multiple meaning words that you can kind of talk about together. And there's silly things that happen. There's just so many opportunities in all of these books, really. There's books that teach like the ABCs. Again, looking through a book that just talks about, A, apple, B, book. It's not entertaining necessarily for a child, but it's, again, about that interaction. And even, a nonfiction book you could go through together. And if your child is really interested in spiders, it's a great opportunity to look through it together and talk about spiders, whether or not, you read all of the facts in a nonfiction book together. There's books that chain events, books that have problems, books that are based on movies. Those ones also really lend themselves to, thinking about what might come next or what they might do and connecting it to things that they already know. So there are lots of opportunities, regardless of the books that you may have access to kind of participate in this shared book reading experience. So another piece of the shared book reading experience is, and this kind of actually plays into the comprehension strategies as well, is to really talk about the core kind of pieces of a story. Hanan is a good resource for lots of language, and they have this CSPAR or CSPAR, which is really the characters, the setting, the problem, the actions, and the resolution. And it's a great way to, really help break down the main ideas and the main components of a book. So while you're reading stories with your child, explicitly and directly use those names. I noticed that they are living, or they are like on the beach. That must be the setting. And it's things like that. Or oh, look, we have a new character. Or this must be the main character. They're in it lots. Just talk directly about all of those pieces of the book. Oh my goodness, he lost his sunglasses. That's a problem. That's the problem in the book. It must be. Oh, good. He got his friend to help him find them. That must be, we're figuring out the problem. We're taking actions to find them. And, you don't have to necessarily just ask about those things. You can just kind of comment on them and think out loud, oh, I wonder if that's the problem right there. Things like that. You can use visual supports, and of course, ask questions to help further your child's understanding. Okay, there's also E's and P's to think about that you can kind of point out with your child. For the E's and P's, it's really about like explaining. So talk to your kids about why things happen. So for example, like why did a character in a book do a particular thing? Why did that character run away? And encourage them to really think critically and pull upon what they already know to help come up with an explanation. And evaluate, like encourage them to kind of offer their own preferences about the things that they see or experience. So have them engage in those conversations to kind of talk about too, like why they have those opinions, encourage them to talk about like whether they like something in a book and why or why not, things like that. And then the P's are like predict, problem solve, project. For predict, it's a lot about, helping them make predictions about what's going to happen next. And, you can encourage them to know, we don't know for sure, but we can think about it. What do you think might happen next? And you can together kind of brainstorm some different possibilities and describe the reasons behind their predictions. Project, you can kind of encourage them to, kind of take the perspective of characters and ask them things like, how do you think he feels? Or what do you think she wants? Or what do you think she's thinking? Why do you think she did that? And that's helpful in understanding the story, especially when we think about how, not everything in a story is necessarily directly written. A lot of things in stories need to be implied. So in that projecting, you're kind of helping your children learn to read between the lines a little bit and understand more about the story. And then problem solving, you can kind of help bring their attention to problems and think together about solutions and talk about them. You can have them draw on their own experiences. Like, one time you lost your glasses at the beach. What did we do? Things like that, just to help them, think more critically about the book, and also to develop their language skills in explaining and understanding all of those things. Oh, and then you can also like have them kind of participate in things themselves. You can create scenarios where they also pretend to look for things, or they also, do whatever things people and characters in the story are doing to help them, further understand that piece. And then I kind of already have mentioned connections a few times, but it's helpful in creating, in sharing book reading to make connections to their own lives. So, you can talk about yourselves in a time that things happen to you. You can talk about the text and like how that's related to another book that you've read together, or the world. This is something that we saw one time. Those connections help children kind of contextualize the language of books as well. And, they can draw upon their own experiences and thoughts and emotions to kind of help them read between the lines and understand more about the books themselves too. I'm gonna play this. If you can't hear it, let me know. I forgot to check it again before we tried.
Woke up 2 hours later in a room with flowers. Madeline soon ate and drank. On her bed there was a crank, just like on Papa's desk, right?
Yeah. Was yours just Papa?
Yeah, like my desk.
We cranked it and made it higher or lower.
Higher.
Higher. And a crack on the ceiling had the habit of sometimes looking like
A rabbit bunny.
a rabbit bunny. Nice. Outside were birds, trees, and sky, and so 10 days quickly passed by.
And so this is my colleague Jen reading to her child. And, she had so many of those components in her shared reading with her child. She gave her child some opportunities to talk about things that she saw in the book. She connected it to things in their own lives, like, oh, there was a crank just like on Papa's desk. And she gave that opportunity to talk more about things outside of just what they were reading. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Woke up 2
Oh no.
hours.
How do I go next? Okay. So that's kind of the basis for shared book reading. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen for a minute and see if there's any questions that you guys have about that piece so far.